Hey everyone, this is Mike from the Comic Book Trove, back today with another Omnibus review, and today I'm going to be taking a look at the Spider-Gwen Ghost Spider Omnibus, which came out earlier this month from Marvel. Although they haven't called it this, it is basically, for all intents and purposes, a Spider-Gwen Omnibus Volume 2, because the material in here does continue directly onwards from the end of that original Spider-Gwen Omnibus. And speaking of that original omnibus, one thing I just want to showcase first of all, which you've probably seen by now, but which I really liked, is the way that they made this book really match the style of that first Spider-Gwen omnibus in terms of this colour scheme, in particular on the spine and the back of the book, on the dust jacket I should say at least. This kind of purpley, pink and purple kind of colour scheme, really nice. Makes it just look great next to the original one on the shelf. You know, like I say, it isn't technically a volume 2, but it also basically is, so it makes sense for them to have made the books match up stylistically like this, and I'm glad they did so. And then on the book itself, you know, we've got this pretty cool yellow and pink / purple, again, colour scheme with various images of Gwen in action. And yeah, so this book gets a little bit thinner than the first Spider-Gwen omnibus, not quite as much in here. But it's thematically, stylistically very much similar to that first book. So what I'd say, before we really even dive into any of this today, and take a look at what's in this book, it is very similar to that first Spider-Gwen omnibus and that first series. So if you did or didn't like that book, for whatever reason, I feel like you'd have a very similar opinion of the material in here. So if you liked the first Spider-Gwen series and that omnibus, you probably like this as well. Vice versa if you didn't. I don't know if this would really win you over to the character either. I enjoyed it. So I hadn't read most of the stuff in this omnibus before until I did buy this book. I'd read most of the first ongoing series that's collected in here. And what is collected in here is a little bit confusing, I think. I'll talk about that a little bit as I go through it. I'll give a spoiler warning as well. Not that I'm going to try and break down all the events in the book. You know, I never do that. But I might discuss something or show something off that you don't want to know about if you've never read this before. So spoiler warning as always before we dive in any further. And yeah, so this is, as I say, the continuing stories of Spider-Gwen. And it's quite an interesting kind of point to jump into with reading this character, because as of the start of this book, she is known to be Gwen Stacy in her universe, in her world, Earth 65 being her designated home world, her dimension, whatever you want to call it. The first few issues in here, so there is this initial, what do they call it, video game comic, is it? What is it? Video comic? What is it? Yeah, video comic, that's the one. So this issue, plus the first 4 issues of the first Ghost Spider series, are tied into the Spider-Geddon event. Now, if you've got the Spider-Verse / Spider-Geddon omnibus, you are going to be getting some double dipping here with this. Also, I know that in terms of the reading order, generally it's been suggested that before you dive in and read the beginning of this series, that you read Spider-Geddon to get more context as to what's happening within here. I mostly agree with that, but I also think you can read this without reading that event, although this does spoil a little bit of what happens in Spider-Geddon in terms of specifically some of the characters that die in the Spider-Geddon event. For me, I mean, this is up to you to make your opinion up on this matter for yourself, but I don't think that reading this really significantly ruins Spider-Geddon if you hadn't read it yet. I don't think it's 100% necessary to read that story before you read this if you really just want to read some Spider-Gwen stories. But if you don't want anything at all spoiled from Spider-Geddon, fair enough, you might want to read that first and then come to check this book out. Hopefully that makes sense. I don't think you have to read Spider-Geddon first, though, is the point I'm trying to make, because these issues, they do hold up well enough if you're just vaguely aware of what Spider-Geddon is. I don't think you have to read that to know what's going on here, is the gist of what I'm trying to say. But this is a lot of, you know, Spider-Verse and Spider-Geddon and all that aside, it's still a lot of multiversal goings-on and craziness. So frequently, this character, this Gwen Stacy, she is hopping between worlds. So Earth 65 is her native Earth. But quite frequently in these issues in here, she's jumping into, I suppose most commonly, the main 616 universe, and she's meeting up with the main original Peter Parker quite a lot during this. In this first couple of issues, though, she's actually in a different Earth, a completely different one. As I say, this is technically tied into Spider-Geddon. This is during a point in the Spider-Geddon story. Gwen is kind of taken out of action and these issues basically show what she was doing during that time, trying to get back to the main fight. Basically, she's on an alternate Earth, trying to find a way back to escape this Earth. It's pretty cool. She meets a version of Spider-Man who was Harry Osborn rather than Peter Parker, and the Gwen Stacy here became a Green Goblin. It's quite good. A lot of what happens in this series, though, I mean, that story, you know, being one example, but the series in general, this omnibus, I found that a lot of the stories are quite rushed. And when you look at the contents in here, you see that it's one 10-issue ongoing series followed immediately by a then rebooted 10-issue ongoing series. And then you start to dive into other things like the Gwen vs. Carnage and the Web Warriors stories that are kind of tucked away in the back, or at least in the second half of this. So it's kind of like this series, this character never really had enough room to breathe, in my opinion. Now, one thing that I think separates it from that first Spider-Gwen omnibus is that that was one ongoing series that lasted, off the top of my head, 34, 35 issues. You know, it was a fairly significant run of issues. Whereas in here, it goes for 10 issues, and then they rebooted it and kind of started again. And I think that that is just something that makes this a little bit confusing. Obviously, in this book, it's fine. It's collected in the right reading order. There's no problems there. But outside of a collection like this, just as a general point, if you wanted to read, you know, Spider-Gwen stories and you're trying to figure out where to jump in, and you see a series that lasts for 10 issues and then another series that lasts for 10 issues, yeah, I don't know why Marvel reboot and start again with their numbering so often. It's something they seem to do a lot, especially in the last 10 years or so. And it's just weird because the second ongoing series in here, it does continue onwards directly from the first one. So why they couldn't call that issues 11 to 20, I don't really know. I don't know, maybe somebody knows more about that than I do. It's a little rant I'm going on here, almost a separate point. But anyway, yes, the stories they're fine, but like I say, it all feels a little bit rushed. For example, there's an ongoing story arc at one point featuring the Jackal, Miles Warren, kind of fairly well-known classic Spider-Man villain. That original character had an obsession with Gwen Stacy. In here, he kind of just shows up again. I didn't even know that the Jackal was around again in comics, to be honest, like until I read this material in here. Admittedly, I'm not fully up to speed on modern Spider-Man comics, you know, but I didn't realise that the Jackal had ever returned. I'm not sure he ever actually had done until he showed up in this series. Anyway, he turns up with a creepy fixation on this Gwen, even though his Gwen, quote-unquote his Gwen, as he sees it in his warped mind, died long ago in the infamous, you know, well-known Spider-Man issue 121, that famous death of the original Gwen Stacy. But now he's fixating on this new Gwen who's showed up, and it's super creepy. But he also kind of goes out of the picture again before too long. And yeah, quite often basically story arcs, things you feel like things are having to be rushed and wrapped up sooner than they were originally intended to be. Let's just touch on some of the artwork though, talking a bit about the story and the writing, which, you know, I did find it enjoyable. But as I say, things were a little bit rushed. But the artwork I really like. You know, it's very much stylistically similar to that in the first Spider-Gwen omnibus. It is a little different. It might actually be a bit nicer. I kind of prefer it in here. It's still got that almost cartoony style to it, but it also looks like a little bit more realistic, quote-unquote realistic at times as well. Anyway, so already we've flipped through the first 10 issues, and then we jump into the next 10 issues that start here, although really, like I say, this is pretty much an issue 11 because it does continue directly onwards. What's going on during this time is that Gwen, you know, she's still got the symbiote suit from the end of that first omnibus, and I think that's kind of the coolest thing about the character. I really like that she's got this, you know, kind of Venom costume that it basically makes all of her clothes. So it forms this costume, the classic costume. It also just creates everything she ever wears is just this symbiote morphing into different outfits and things. It's pretty cool. Original Spider-Man, Peter Parker, you know, he shows up quite a bit in here. He's helping her out because, like I say, she's coming over to the 616 universe. She starts to study at ESU, Empire State University. And for a lot of this story, yeah, it's kind of a lot of jumping back and forth between her Earth and then the main Marvel Earth. To say it's really quite a small run of issues, it does pack in quite a lot, but like I say, what you lose as a result of that is any sense of things being able to be properly built up and really have a satisfying payoff, because things are kind of just rushing by in the blink of an eye. You know, there's an issue or two for a villain to emerge from the shadows, then there's a fight or two with Gwen, and then that villain is gone and you're moving on to the next thing before you really have time to digest what just happened. It's not bad, it's just not as good as it could have been. I think that the first Spider-Gwen series did a better job of building things up at a better pace. And like I say, things in here just seem to be happening quite quickly. Whether or not you like or dislike that, I suppose, is up to you, because like I say, it's not inherently a criticism. It does give the stories quite a fast pace, and it's almost sort of, not quite, but almost anthological, you know, like episodic in a way, because there are some ongoing plot points that run throughout the story as a whole, but it also just kind of feels like, you know, you move on from one villain to another in quite a short space of time. Like the Jackal, we're seeing the Jackal here, for example, shows up, and then he's basically bested once, and then doesn't show up again. You move on to the next villain at that point. And there is a cool annual in here. I did quite like this, even though the villain here is Arcade, and Arcade just, yeah, sick of that character from X-Men. He just showed up all the time, so whenever he shows up in anything, kind of sick of Arcade. He's a one-trick pony of a villain in my opinion, but I did kind of like this because basically it's Gwen runs this gauntlet that was originally intended for Spider-Man, not for her, and she has to fight all these kind of robotic versions of classic Spider-Man villains and then some Spider-Man allies like Punisher and Daredevil, and it results in her having to rescue herself, you know, quote-unquote herself. All this multiversal stuff gets quite confusing to talk about, I'll say that, and you've got to talk about other versions of Earth and other versions of characters all the time. Yeah, it's a little bit complicated, but I think it's easy enough to follow when you're reading it. Yeah, then this is kind of an interesting story. I did like this, to be fair. This comes towards the end of the second ongoing series, so yet a version of Sue and Johnny Storm show up. I quite like what happens with those versions of those characters. Won't spoil it exactly in here, but yeah, I did find that quite interesting. But like I say, because it was such really a short run of issues, and it all just wraps up quite quickly with a, you know, well, within 20 issues overall, but within 10 issues of the second series, it means that it just has to really wrap up the ending in a very quick amount of time. There are quite a few loose threads, you know, it is not all neat and tidy the way that it's finished. And the thing about this omnibus is that from this point onwards, we're just over halfway in, basically. You get to the end of the second ongoing series, then kind of move into Gwen versus Carnage. This kind of sort of carries on. This is a 3-issue miniseries tied into the King in Black event. I've not read King in Black, so I don't really know much about that on the whole, but I didn't really have any problem following this through. This kinda is a little bit of a continuation of the main story from the other series, but also very much more of a forced tie-in. That's how it felt to me, rather than being, you know, part of the larger ongoing Spider-Gwen narrative. Didn't really feel like that so much. It tried to be, but yeah, it was just kind of obviously heavily tied into this whole larger ongoing symbiote story that was this event. Didn't really grip me very much, this. But following on from this, tucked away in the back is the Web Warriors series, or mini-series, which ran for 11 issues, which chronologically takes place before the rest of the stuff in this book, but I think they've tucked it away in the back because it's also quite distinctly separate, so it makes a bit more sense to keep this separate from all that. And because this is not exactly primarily a Gwen Stacy series, a Spider-Gwen series, she's just in it. She is one of the main characters in it, but it features plenty of other characters as well, and this is a real kind of Spider-Verse throwback, you know? This is not specifically tied into Spider-Verse, so this Web Warriors series is not in the Spider-Verse Spider-Geddon Omnibus, but it's very much storytelling in that same kind of vein, you know? It's a lot of different Spider variants, doing a lot of dimension hopping, and I really liked this. This is a lot of fun. You know, some cool artwork in here as well. Not my favourite artwork, but it's quite nice. I just enjoyed it. You know, I'm quite a sucker for the whole Spider-Verse thing anyway. I find it to be a lot of fun as a concept, so this is really more of that. And all in all, although I've been fairly critical of this, because I will say that I didn't like it as much as the first Spider-Gwen Omnibus, I think that holds together as a much better, coherent, almost one-and-done kind of omnibus, because things wrap up quite nicely in there. I don't think that this, you know, these continuing stories and series of Spider-Gwen managed to in a sense, almost justify their own existence properly. It's almost like Marvel weren't quite sure what to do with this character. But, I mean, that would explain why the series keeps rebooting every 10 issues. Yeah, so mixed feelings on this one. I liked it enough that I'm glad I have the book, and, you know, I definitely enjoyed reading it, but it just felt like a lot of missed opportunities. I just kind of wish that, you know, they had a longer series to work with and do more with this character. Ultimately, that was the main letdown of the book, but it would be something I'd be happy to hear the opinions of others on. I mean, I always am happy to hear anyone's thoughts on anything that I take a look at, but this one is certainly something I'd be quite curious to know about what other people thought. I liked it, like I say. Would have liked to have enjoyed it more than I did, but, you know, that's how it goes sometimes. You know, sometimes things can not quite live up to your expectations and your hopes, but overall, it was fun, and there's definitely a good time to be had reading this if you're into the Spider-Gwen character. Like I say, I do think she's a great thing to have come out of the whole Spider-Verse concept, and I'm glad she's around. I haven't read anything that's featured this character kind of, you know, published after anything in here. So this is, as of right now, this is the most recent Spider-Gwen material I've read within this omnibus. I know there's been a few things. There's like a new Gwenverse or something series going on at the moment. I haven't checked that out. But I hope that Marvel kind of figure out exactly what they want to do with this character, because it does seem like they can't quite decide if they want her to be in her own universe and have her own stories specifically there, or being part of the 616. They're literally trying to do both within here, and I do feel like that almost, you know, lets it down. It dilutes the story. It's just a little bit too much, I think. There are some really cool extras in here, though. Really great variants. This is a good one by Art Germ. Yeah, I do like all these. I've had a flick through all these variant covers. Some really cool stuff. This was one of the variant covers for the Omnibus. That one by Andrew Robinson. I like this as well. Done in the style of the Across the Spider-Verse, Into the Spider-Verse movies. The key one in here, I suppose, is that super popular, I know it's the cover that most people went for, the In-Hyuk Lee Venom cover, Gwenom cover. Yeah, this one here. That was yeah, one of the choices for the Omnibus cover. Obviously, that's a stunning piece of artwork. It was sold out by the time I picked this book up, so hence why I went with the standard cover. Not that that's a bad cover, but that's great. And this one as well, the matching one that goes with Mary Jane as Carnage. That's also a bit of awesome artwork right there. Love those covers. But all this is very cool. Great extras section. And overall, again, though I've been critical, I do think this is a good omnibus. You know, it's worth reading if you're into this character, but I will just say if you're not into this character, if you didn't enjoy the first omnibus or the first, you know, series collected in that book, however you read it, yeah, again, to reiterate, I don't think you would really like this too much either. But that is going to be that. Hopefully that's been of some interest as I flick through there. As I say, let me know what you think about this book, and I will be back again soon to discuss something else. Thanks for watching for always.